Well, first of all, I want to thank Marnie for the invitation, and I'm sorry I cannot be with you in person today. I hope in the near future I can be there. I felt it's very important, the subject of this conference, and to rethink the idea of ways in which to evaluate art. That is socially engaged or is political effectiveness. When we talk about evaluation, people get scared because they start feeling that the art practice goes too much into other areas, like sociology and other areas of expertise that were supposed to be in direct conflict with the poetics and the desires of art. My concept of political art is a practice that has consequences, like an art practice with consequences. And in that sense, it is very rewarding and very opening concept because you understand that it's political not because the images you're using, not because the subject you're talking about, but because the way in which you have activated those. That's a problem I have sometimes with certain artists who use the technique or the genre of social engaged art or community-based art or political art, in which they actually use, let's say, how can we say this? They use kind of the things that look like they're working with the community, or they enter the practice with a very strong authorial position. And I feel very conflicted about that because this is exactly, talking about evaluation, this is exactly one of the elements that I feel are key is how can the project evolve in itself? How can the project create its own microsystem, its own, its own world with its own law, instead of coming and decided to produce a piece in the space that is social or in a community or with a community. So I think there is a big mistake about art that has to be put in question once you start doing these projects, because you cannot anymore be in the regime of aesthetics that contemporary art or classical art or 20th century art is using. We need to enter a regime of what I call aesthetics, so the same word aesthetics, but you separate the S and the ethics. You put the H, so it becomes the aesthetic of ethics. It becomes a reflection on how can we react to ethics, how can we develop an ecology, an aesthetic ecology of ethics, and how can we understand the emotional reaction we have to other things other than the pure aesthetic. Like, it's almost like putting aesthetics to work for ethics. And I feel like this kind of projects, this kind of practices have to be seen through that regime in order to be evaluated. And when I talk about ethics, I'm not talking about this kind of normative, behavior which everybody is working in this, acting the same way, but to the opposite. I'm saying like this kind of artworks have to create new ethics, because precisely, precisely what they're doing is questioning not only the system, the institutional or structural system that is in place in whatever subject you're working, like being, prison or immigration or human rights, etc. But you are also criticizing the kind of established and accepted behavior, and even legalized behavior in those subjects. So you have to also, let's say, fight an all ethical regime in those areas. Our role as artists is also to redefine for the people who are not experts, who are not the specialists in art, what the role of art is in society. And I think we need to update, let's say, the idea they have of what art is. We have to update their the view of what an artist is, what do artists do, and that will also help a lot to advance this discussion. So when I say using art instead of instrumentalized art, I'm talking more than anything about what I call useful art, or arte útil in Spanish, which is how can you use the tools that art provides? How do you use the privilege? How do you use the kind of emotional, spectrum? How do you use creativity? How do you use setting up, let's say, the what if environment through art for these people. So this is very different from instrumentalizing art, which is something that in the research for the Arte Útil exhibition, we find out that the UK, Australia, and some other countries that had been part of that group have a big problem, and because the government institutions are instrumentalizing art. I mean, they're using art and they're reducing what political art and social engaged art and arte útil art could be. And arte útil and social engaged art can work with government agencies, can work with social associations, but cannot be in a I don't know how to say this. Like, it cannot be in a kind of dependent relationship with that. He has to have his own independent and his own, let's say, a stand. So yes, while you work with all of them, it's a collaboration. It's not a subjugation. Like, it's not using art for their means. It's more about how can art provide another extra element to the conversation, to the structure you want to create. And part of that is also the fact that we can have the what if moment that is very different from other practices to create, because many of the practices work with the idea of the past more than the idea of the future. And I feel like art, like a lot of political and social engaged art, while we are working with the reference of the past, which is very present, we're mostly trying to propose certain construction of the future. I think one of the, let's say, the main problem with instrumentalizing art is that the artist is almost feel like almost feel that it's been taken is taken away from their right or their possibility to say things that people don't want to hear. I feel that the great capacity of raw honesty that art has, and the great capacity of self-reflection and self-criticism that a lot of art practices have, where yes, you are talking about something else, but you're also understanding what you're doing and how you're doing it and how to change what you're doing it to arrive to this, and the possibility of self-regulating or constantly the constant self-adjusting of an art project is being taken away. So I think it's extremely dangerous, and I feel like almost it is our duty as artists to talk to these agencies, because we need to work with them. It's not like the solution, I don't think, is just like close the door and that's your world, that's my world, because we are working for the same. And artist who wants to do social engaged art cannot work on its own in a kind of a studio practice. It has to really go out there and interact with all these other agencies that are also trying to pursue the exact same goal that you're looking for. So I think they're not the enemies, they're just collaborators that need to be informed and trained into what is contemporary art and what is the role of art. For that, we have to be clear as artists, what is the role we want for art? And I think sometimes that's not very clear. Because also I feel like instrumentalizing art is a very neoliberal kind of attitude where you are looking for a certain, you're looking for a certain outcome, a certain outcome that is actually in favor having benefit to the same privileged class in a kind of disguise of pretending to help somebody else. And I think Arte Útil is a practice that is trying to destroy, not only question the system. I don't think Arte Útil wants only to question the system, it also wants to destroy the system in order to create a new proposal or a new regime, or at least for you to understand the system is vulnerable, so it is okay, you can try it out, something different. And Immigrant Movement International is a project that I started because it was almost the moment in which I identified myself with a group of immigrants that were having an immigrant descent, who were being having riots in the skirts of Paris. And I think that helped me to understand myself in a very different identity, with a different identity. Why? Because part of what happened with immigrants is we have classes of immigrants, and not everybody is an immigrant. But it almost feels that immigrant is a label used to only certain people, like mainly poor, undocumented, and sometimes illiterate, with very low education, or very low, very small possibilities of engage in a good job and a well-paid job. My question was like, why are immigrants part of have direct political representation? Why do immigrants always have to have a local person translating their desires, their demands, and how can we create a structure, a political structure, in which immigrants can take political power? How can we create a political system in which the law regarding immigrants is done not only by the people supposedly affected by immigrants, people who receive immigrants, but also the immigrants themselves? What we try to do is to combine things that people ask us. We have a very open structure in which people feel they can ask for things, like, oh, why don't we do this? Or do you have any class about this? So we have to have a very open ear and eyes to understand what the community needs. I think that's very important in social engaged art, that you have to be open to what you don't want to hear or what you don't even know. People are going to ask, so, and to be flexible, have a flexible structure, because otherwise you create an alienation. You can alienate the people you're working with, because I feel like a lot of people who approach art from this other side, from this other area, the non-art experience, they need to understand what is in for them, and I feel it has worked very well for us in terms of having a really good connection with the community, because we're not imposing anything, we're negotiating what you want and what we want to propose you to consider. I had a little crisis that I projected into the project, in which I did not want to be the boss or the artist or the person determining what was happening in the project. So I created a situation in which we created a transition process. And I think we always talk about giving the community the tools, giving the community the project, and so on. It's very hard for an artist. It's your baby. You have a very specific vision. You feel nobody else has the vision. You feel like sometimes people don't understand what it's very hard. Thank God I didn't have to go through a lot of that, because I had a very, like, a daily based relationship with the community. So I feel like that vision was there and people saw it and understood it. But I felt weird at some point about me having that vision, and I wanted to see what their vision was as well. So I decided that the best way to do that was having a transition in which we were giving the project to the community. It's for 6 months. We had what we call La Escuelitas, like a school of art and activism. So in that school, they had classes about community organizing, political organizing, power structure, struggle, methodologies, all of these conventional activist classes, together with contemporary art classes. And I think it's very important, because I do believe in the force of contemporary art and the tools of contemporary art to be used in this. But you need to inform people what those are. You cannot use them and pretend they're silly and they don't get it. You need to actually tell them and give them the same vocabulary and the same tools that you have, in order to have a really good dialogue. So basically they learned about social engaged art. They saw a lot of projects that were social engaged art. And that was fantastic, because they felt like any of us feel when we encounter another artist doing something similar to what we, that they had a community, that these kind of practices were not isolated caprice of an artist, but there was actually a community of artists developing this strategy and these methodologies, and they were part of a larger discussion, which was fantastic. I think one of the most important elements that I have found in this experience of Immigrant Movement International and other long-term projects that are socially engaged projects is that to not, let's say, to understand what is the rhythm of the project. Many times the evaluation toolkit that you are provided with from the art world, as well as from other, social fields or political fields, are very almost like abusive, in the sense like you, and very aggressive, because sometimes it entails that you create a very violent relationship with the project, where you demand certain result when maybe there is no time for results yet. For example, in Immigrant Movement International, from the beginning I said this is a 5-year project, because I knew I could not fulfill the satisfaction of the people who were inviting me, even if it was a 1-year-long commitment, in order to not have a violent and abusive community art project. So I feel we have to do still a lot of work with the art institution to push them into be more close to civic institutions, with, and this is very important, the respect of the freedom of the artists of the work, so not going into the instrumentalization. But I think this, for me, is one of the most important things, understanding the natural ecology and the natural progression of the project itself, and the relation with its own timing. I think we're changing from being a service-based project to be slowly becoming a political movement, which is the original goal. There's a lot still to be done. More than anything, I feel like what needs to be done still is to fight a lot of prejudice against social engaged art. Fight this idea like, oh, then what are you doing? Is that social? Are you a social worker? Like, what are you doing? Why this is art? This is not art. This is just you helping somebody. I mean, all of these extremely silly and infantile conversations that we still have in the art world about these practices somehow. And instead of that, trying to say, okay, if this is here, it's here to stay, how can we create an interesting theoretical landscape for this practice? How can we create a fulfilling engagement? So I think people need to understand that this different set of priorities is also legitimate, that our world and the art institution, it's okay for some people that those are not the end of or the aim of their projects, and it's okay. I mean, we need to accept that. We need to accept that not for everybody the art world or the Blue Sheep exhibition is interesting or is even like something they want to be part of, and we need to start creating multiple art worlds.